the other question I had is you talked about proven reserves. How do they prove a reserve of oil?
Good question. If you talk to a petroleum geologist, they know where to look for oil because they know how it's formed. And it was formed by the partial decomposition of algae and other plant matter in shallow seas hundreds of millions of years ago. So you look for sedimentary rock first. But then you have to look for some kind of cap over that rock, like a dome, a salt dome, because over the course of geologic time, the oil can seep up to the surface, and then it's oxidized, and it's not oil anymore. It just it decomposes. So the petroleum geologists know what geological formations to look for. They've pretty much explored everywhere there is to explore on all the continents except for Antarctica and the continental shelves. So they're pretty confident in saying that they found all the major oil reservoirs, and that it's almost virtually impossible that they'll find anything the size of Ghawar, which is the big oil reservoir in Saudi Arabia that has 90 billion barrels of oil, or had that many billion barrels of oil there. So the geologists know where to look. They've looked there. They will find some more, undoubtedly, but probably not any large reservoirs.
They talk about the Alaska reserves, and I wonder if those are proven.
They have a pretty good estimate of the size of the oil reserves in Anwar. And the way I think about it is that if we took all that oil and we used it here in the United States, it would be about a 9-month supply. So there's some oil, and there's actually quite a bit of oil there, but we're using oil at such a huge rate now that we'd use it up pretty quickly.
What does the strategic reserve have? Would that be just like a 20-minute supply? Or?
That's a good question. There is a strategic reserve in that few months, maybe, something like that.
But that would all have to be refined, too. It's just crude oil, isn't it, that's stored there?
I believe so, yeah. Mm-hmm.
As far as, like, petroleum for plastics and those type of uses, what do we do when you get to where you have no more oil? How does the plastic industry continue on?
Well, that's a good question. And I know the plastic industries are concerned with that, and I've heard that Cargill, they're investigating bioplastics where you don't use petroleum feedstocks. Cargill has plastics. Polylactic acid is one of them, and I've heard a talk where I've seen some of their products. So they can make water bottles out of polylactic acid. They can make shirts, biodegradable shirts from polylactic acid. So it's in the works, but it's something that takes development. It takes years or decades to first develop the plastic and then diffuse it into the economy. And you can bet that when the price of oil continues to increase, that there'll be lots of chemists who will be eagerly trying to innovate plastics made out of organic feedstocks. But does that answer the question?
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So, anybody else on peak oil? Okay, now let me talk about renewable energy and how we're doing in Minnesota. And I think the story here is we're really doing pretty well. And another thing that will come out of presenting the data for both ethanol and wind is that the rural areas in Minnesota are really quite rich in resources. And it only remains to figure out a sustainable way of making use of the resources. So renewable energy industry in Minnesota has taken, there are two strands. One is ethanol and one is wind. So I got interested a while ago about just plotting the course of the ethanol industry in Minnesota. So this chart shows ethanol production by year. The data is from Minnesota Department of Agriculture, their webpage, and they haven't updated it yet for 2007. I just checked that a couple of days ago. But currently, there are 16 plants producing 550 million gallons, and you see a steady increase in the amount of ethanol that has been produced yearly as more and more plants have gone online. Ethanol is sort of renewable, so this is really a success story for Minnesota, the Minnesota renewable energy industry. And this graph comes also from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture webpage, and the information is the same as in the chart. So production is in red, starts out low at 11 million gallons in 1990 and has been increasing steadily. Consumption's in blue, so you see consumption has leveled off at about 250 million gallons a year. That's the 10% mandate of ethanol in gasoline in Minnesota. And with the 20% mandate, it'll be doubled by 2013. So just recently, Minnesota's become an exporter of ethanol. I've toured the ethanol plant outside Lake Crystal, and the plant manager said that they send all their ethanol to California and use it as an oxygenate in the gasoline there. So, successful renewable energy industry. And likewise for wind, and when I talk about wind here in Kasson, I realize it's kind of like taking coals to Newcastle with McNeilus Wind Farm just down the road. But the story is really very good. There are currently 1,300 megawatts installed capacity and about 1,100 turbines. And if you break down the installed capacity by year, the first wind farms were out of Buffalo Ridge in western Minnesota, a good number of turbines there. And since then, installation has been kind of plunking along, sometimes fewer, sometimes more. And last year was really a banner year for installation of turbines, 263 for an installed capacity of 405 megawatts. So things are really doing quite well as far as increasing the amount of electricity we get from wind in Minnesota. Things are doing well, but then here's the question I asked a couple of years ago: is this enough? And what I mean by enough is that what we'd like is for all our energy to be renewable locally in Minnesota, because then we would be energy independent and we wouldn't be using fossil fuels. So look at a local economy, and I looked at on the level of a county, and assume that it's sustainable in the sense that all the energy that's used in that county is renewable. Well, consider the kinds of energy that you use, and what you use are gasoline for your car, you use electricity in your homes and businesses, and you use natural gas to heat your homes. Now, electricity, mostly we get from coal in Minnesota, about 75% from coal, in fact. So let's just suppose that we did that all renewably, so that means ethanol instead of gasoline. That means electricity from wind. And then when I got to natural gas, I wasn't sure about the best way to look at that, but there are devices called biodigesters that are part of the rural economy in some places. And the question is, how much renewable energy is required to replace our fossil fuel energy needs?